Hello, I'm Steven Roy Goodman, host of Higher Education Today, a production of the University of the District of Columbia. Welcome back to the education program that connects you to contemporary issues, people, and institutions involved in the world of higher education. Today we'll be talking about women's colleges. Dr. Carol Crist is president of Smith College, one of 54 women's colleges in the United States. Dr. Crist has published 2 books about poetry and teaches interdisciplinary seminars on science and literature. Under her presidential tenure, Smith has made a significant commitment to international and intercultural studies. 13% of first-year students at Smith are now from outside of the U.S. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Well, thanks again for coming on. I guess if we could start, can you tell us why would a young woman go to a women's college?
A young woman would go to a women's college because she wants to develop her capacity for leadership. The track record of women's colleges shows that in every area of endeavor, corporate leadership, government, medicine, science, women who have gone to women's colleges occupy a disproportionate percentage of leadership positions.
Well, you know, I've studied this quite a bit, and in fact, we had a young woman who was 16 years old from Mary Baldwin who came on to the show, and she was incredibly articulate, even though she's only 16. And so I'm a fan of women's colleges, but if I'm not mistaken, I've read a survey that showed that either 3 or 4% of high school girls are willing to consider women's colleges in the United States. Is that true?
Yes, that's true, that if you ask the average 16 or 17-year-old, she probably will say that she isn't thinking of a women's college. But many women who say that wind up at women's colleges for a set of interesting individual reasons, and then find themselves converted to the real strengths of women's colleges.
How would you convert that 3% to a higher number? If you were speaking to some young women today, young girls today who are watching, and their parents, and let's say some young girls say to their parents, "Mom, I don't want to go to a women's college. I don't care what you say." What would be some of the arguments that you would encourage the mom or the dad to share with the daughter?
If the young woman is interested in science and engineering, I would tell her that a much higher percentage of women major in science and engineering, persist in science and engineering at women's colleges. People are very worried nationally about the attrition of women from science and mathematics and engineering. That isn't true of women's colleges. In fact, we have something called negative attrition, that more women choose science majors than decide to switch their major to English or sociology. If the young woman is interested in a leadership position in the world, if she wants to change the world, she will develop her capacity for leadership at a women's college. And she will have a network of friends for life. The kind of alumni life of women's colleges, afterlife, is extraordinarily strong. So it gives her a network of friends and professional colleagues everywhere in the world.
Well, that's a fair point. How is the alumni network different for Smith, let's say, than it is at Amherst or another co-ed school in Massachusetts?
I think it's because women who go to women's colleges feel that they've made a very special choice, and they feel that they should hold out a hand to other women wherever they are. There's also a very strong sense of community at women's colleges. You know, Madeleine Albright said that there is a special place in hell for women that don't help other women. And I think that that's something that is in the culture. It's in the genes of women who go to women's colleges. They really hold out, and maybe you call it the old girls network or the young girls network, but that there's a very strong sense of community and of opening doors to your fellow graduates.
Well, you make an interesting point there. In fact, you mentioned Madeleine Albright. One of my favorite students from a few years ago is currently at Wellesley and is involved in that very program that's named for Secretary Albright. So I think that that's an interesting point.
Yes, in fact it is. There's an initiative that Wellesley, together with Smith, Barnard, Bryn Mawr, and Mount Holyoke, are developing with the State Department for Women in Public Service, a leadership program. And Madeleine Albright spoke at the inaugural meeting of this group, and she told a story, which I think is wonderful. She said one of her grandchildren said to her, "Granny, what's so special about being Secretary of State? Aren't all Secretaries of State women?"
That's very
and of course, Hillary Clinton is a graduate of a women's college as well.
That's fair enough. In terms of the issue of the collaboration between other women's colleges, I know that you and the president of Mount Holyoke started some sort of organization, and I wasn't quite clear what that organization does.
Yes, Mount Holyoke and Smith started an organization called Women's Education Worldwide. It is an organization of women's colleges around the world. Strange to say, no one had previously thought of connecting the women's colleges around the world. And the thing that we discovered when we founded this organization is that there are new women's colleges springing up, particularly in the Middle East, in Africa, and in Asia. So it very much reminds me of the decades at the end of the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, when women's colleges were being founded in considerable numbers in the United States and also in the United Kingdom. There's a time when women are emerging with a sense of greater possibilities in countries that have historically discriminated against women, and women's colleges are being developed to meet that need.
Well, but aren't we then, in some ways, competing against those new schools by having schools like Smith or Wellesley or Sweetbriar?
Well, there's such a large deficit of educational opportunities for women, particularly in the developing world, but also in other parts of the world, that there are more than enough students for all of us.
Well, who are the students internationally who come to Smith?
They come from 60 different countries, a lot of them from Asia. We have, as many colleges do, a considerable number of students from China. We also have students from India, from Pakistan, from Malaysia, from Japan, from Korea, as well as Africa, South America, and even some students from Europe.
And you go and actively recruit these students, or are they generally just come because they know the quality of the Smith experience?
We both recruit those students, but they also, Smith is one of the few colleges in the United States that gives financial aid to international students. So the word spreads fast, and they're an extraordinary group of students, very, very intent on taking from Smith everything that the college has to offer and turning it to use ultimately in careers that will benefit their countries.
And in terms of the 13% of the students who are making up Smith who are international, what percentage of them end up staying in the United States after they graduate?
I don't really have that figure. What I've learned from talking to many of our international alumni is that the alternatives of staying in this country or going home really don't adequately describe the kinds of lives they lead, that they lead very international lives, moving among the United States, London, their country, but I would say for most of them, their primary commitment is to doing work that is in some way connected to their country.
Well, my understanding is that the new Pakistani ambassador to the United States is a Smith graduate.
That's exactly right, Sherry Raymond.
And have you had dealings with her in any way?
Not yet. I think she's pretty busy.
Fair enough, but I think that's a fair point that
Yes.
that women from Smith are actually doing all sorts of interesting things.
Yes.
In terms of women who return to school later in life, can you say a word or two about how Smith accommodates women who are non-traditional students?
Yes, Smith founded a program in the 70s to recruit women to Smith who had interrupted their educations, who had dropped out of college to have children or just hadn't pursued a straight path to college. It's called the Ada Comstock Scholars Program. It's a wonderful program. And students in it range from 26 to we graduated someone who was 87 a number of years ago. So very broad range of ages. Many faculty say that they value the Adas, as they're called, more than any students at Smith because of the breadth of human experience that they bring to the college.
And do they live at Smith?
Some of them live at Smith, but some of them live in traditional houses, is what we call our dormitories. Others live in special houses for Adas, and we even have one house that's for Adas with children. That's a pretty lively place. Others live in apartments in Northampton or commute from their homes.
That's interesting. And do other colleges have anything like this, as far as you know?
A number of the women's colleges do. Mount Holyoke, for example, has such a program. And there are many more options for older women returning to college today than there were in the 70s, that the community college system has grown tremendously. There are many college programs in state colleges and universities that seek to recruit older students, not just older women. So there are more options today, but we're very proud of our ADA program at Smith.
Fair enough. In terms of the needs of women, are the needs of women different today than they were a generation ago in terms of educational opportunities?
Depends on what you mean by a generation ago. Certainly women have complicated questions that they have to think about as they think about the goals that they have in their lives. That I wouldn't say just women, but I'll talk about women now, have multiple goals for their lives, not just what do I want to be when I grow up, but what are the things that I want from relationships, from family? What do I want my legacy to be? What do I want the significance of my work to be? We try to help students think about those questions. We hardly think or expect that they will have all the answers at the age of 20 or 21 or 22, but we want them to know that they're important questions. When I first went out on the road as president of Smith, I was really interested to meet alumni from, say, classes in the 70s and 80s who said, you know, Smith prepared me wonderfully for my career. I've been extremely successful in my career, but I felt when I had children, I had hit a brick wall, and nothing that Smith told me enabled me to figure out how to do it. And so we created a new center. It's called the Center for Work and Life, that has lots of programs for students to enable them to think about the questions and to enable them to hear alumni that we invite to Smith to talk about what their path has been in their life and work. Many students, I think, have the illusion that when they graduate from college, they have to have it all figured out, and it's going to be a straight line. You're going to get your first job, and it's going to take you to wherever your aspirations are. But in fact, in these days, students can look forward to not having only 5 or 6 different jobs, but 5 or 6 different careers. And so what we're trying to teach students is you don't have to have it all figured out, and you really have to have the flexibility and the imagination and the courage to take risks to make those moves at points in your career where you think, maybe I'd rather do something else, or maybe this isn't quite what I thought it would be when I started down this path.
And do you think that a young woman who's questioning some of the things that you're raising is better equipped to think about that having gone to a women's college than having gone to a co-ed school?
I do, or I feel that women who go to women's colleges develop a kind of authenticity and security of self that makes it easier to take risks. At women's colleges, women have all the opportunities are for women, all the leadership positions are for women. Women help govern the campus through the student government, through the governance system in their houses, and so they get used to making decisions, and they get used to understanding the risk that's involved when you start a new enterprise. And that's very valuable training when you go on in your life to the set of aspirations, to try to realize the set of aspirations that you have.
Fair enough. Well, you keep raising the issue of risk and sorting out risk, and I think that that's a fair comment. And when I'm not hosting the show, as you know, I'm an educational consultant, and a lot of my students are thinking about where they want to go to school. And interestingly, the issue of risk rarely comes up from the perspective of the young woman. She's thinking about what's this going to do for her career, but it's interesting that you keep talking about the issue of risk because you're looking at it in a very different way.
Well, that's very interesting. At the inaugural event of this Women in Public Service initiative, the 2 keynote speakers were Hillary Clinton and Christine Lagarde. And both of their speeches, and I'm sure they hadn't talked about this beforehand, were about the most important thing for women to learn who embark in careers in public service is risk-taking. It talked about running for office. In fact, Christine Lagarde talked about Hillary Clinton's running for president and said, that was a big risk. You have to when you run for office. understand that you might not win, you might not get elected, you might not get the nomination. I think all of our lives have risk in them, and I mean risk in a positive sense. And I think women often have to be more encouraged than men to take risk of the sort that is capacity building, that really makes you into a larger and more capable person.
Do you think young boys are more hardwired to want risk than young girls?
Yes, in fact, I've often thought that perhaps we wouldn't be in the financial trouble that we're in right now if we didn't have so many men at the tops of our big investment banking firms.
Well, we'll be sure to send this tape up to the folks in New York. In terms of the timelines that you've been working on, I know there's a big initiative that you're working on in terms of timelines. Could you say a word or two about the timelines that you're envisioning for future Smith students?
I certainly can. We work on two different timelines. We work on what we're going to do next year and the year after, and our most immediate goals for Smith are developing our international programs so that every young woman who goes to Smith has an experience that enables her to cross borders, to have international experience, whether that's study abroad or shorter term study abroad, or an experience in the United States that brings her into real encounter with international issues. We're also developing our science programs. We have a fairly young 10-year-old engineering program that's a great opportunity at Smith. But at the same time we're doing that, we're thinking 20 and 30 years ahead, that this is a time in higher education where there is more change going on than any time since the immediate post-World War II period. And I think that demands of colleges and universities both the ability to be nimble, to experiment, to have pilot projects that test ways in which their own model might change. At the same time, you have to have your crystal ball or your binoculars, whatever it is that you think of as a metaphor for looking 20 years down the line or even 10 years down the line and how things might change.
Well, do you think that the for-profit schools are a welcome addition to the mix in this regard?
Even though there are abuses that some of the for-profits have been guilty of, yes, I do think they're an important addition to the mix. In today's world, many students will go to multiple institutions, not only in the course of their baccalaureate career, but in the course of their lives, where continuing education is increasingly important as individuals change careers, change jobs, and having portable, just-in-time, online education that is not necessarily 4 years in one place in the kind of education that Smith provides is, I think, a valuable addition to the educational mix.
And speaking of the careers, the Career Center that you have and the way in which you guide students through careers, how does it work? How does a current Smith student use the Career Center, and how does an alum use the Career Center?
Well, a current Smith student uses the Career Center by taking advantage of the many opportunities that the Career Center offers. And let me describe just two where the Career Center has been point. In the last week, we took a group of about 40 students to New York, to the UN, to have a day-long program, not only about the UN, but about careers in international relations. We had another program that was a joint program with Oxfam America, in which a number of the staff from Oxfam came to the campus to do a day-long advocacy institute on the problem of world hunger, in which one of the main subjects was how do you do nonprofit work? So we have lots of programs that students take advantage of all through their time at Smith. We always have a trip over January in which students go to New York and go from office to office, visiting with alums and hearing about the kinds of work and the kinds of organizations that they work for. We also do lots of things like interview training. How do you write up your CV? Things like how do you prepare a resume, as well as many job opportunities. one of the things that Smith does is provides an internship, paid by Smith, for every Smith student at the time, in the time that she's a Smith. And those are very important opportunities both to learn about yourself, what you might be good at, to test whether you might want this career that you're, getting a little taste of through an internship, but it also opens doors for future jobs after Smith. So when a student is a senior, she starts haunting the career office much more regularly and looks for job listings, meets with interviewers from various companies who come to the college to interview for potential openings. Alumni have the advantage of both a consulting service, but also many online programs as they think about career transitions, think about finding a new job. So there are a set of services for alumni and a set of very extensive services for undergraduates.
Let's say I'm 40 years old and I'm a woman who graduated 20 years ago from Smith. I can call up Smith and say, I'd like to use the consulting services of the office?
That's right. And you could also will have access to a number of online programs that are, how do you look for a job? How do you interview? How do you write your resume? So that there are career services available to you in webinars.
Fair enough. And in terms of the other colleges in Massachusetts, in Western Massachusetts, can you say a word or two about how students can take courses at all the schools?
I certainly can. Smith is a member of a 5-college consortium at Smith, Mount Holyoke, Amherst College, Hampshire College, and the University of Massachusetts at Amherst. Any student at any of those colleges can take any course at any of the other colleges. And so there's a free bus. It runs between the campuses, and the bus is sometimes pretty crowded because students, about 50% of our students take advantage of this and take a course at one of the other campuses. There also are a number of joint programs that the 5 colleges do.
Fair enough. And can you say a word or two about the COFI group, the Consortium on Financing Higher Education?
I certainly can. The COFI group is a historic group of all the Ivy League universities, many of the most competitive universities in the United States, Northwestern, Stanford, Washington University, and as well as the most competitive liberal arts colleges. Smith has been a member since its founding. Now it is largely a data collecting consortium. We share data confidentially, and it provides a wonderful way for us to benchmark ourselves against a peer group.
And in terms of the peer group, if you can say a word or two about the peer group that affects the overlaps of, I know the overlap group isn't exactly COFI, but what things are you sharing in terms of that data collection?
Financial aid data, student satisfaction data, alumni outcome data, our staffing data comparing how many staff we have in every department. It's a really important resource for us as we think about how to be financially disciplined. If we're looking at a particular department, we can immediately call up on our desktop how many people our peer group has employed in that same department. So just about anything you measure, we compare it in the COFI group.
That's interesting. And in terms of money, we're going to be out of time in a second, but how much of your time, if you don't mind me asking, do you spend fundraising?
So I spend about 50% of the time on the road. I would call it not just fundraising, but friend-raising as well.
Friend and fundraising?
Yes.
Fair enough. And you used to be at Berkeley.
Yes.
And you were at Berkeley for a long time, if I remember correctly. And how would you compare Berkeley as an institution to Smith?
Oh, what a wonderful question. I always tell students who are thinking about an undergraduate experience at a big state university, flagship university like Berkeley, and a liberal arts college, choose a liberal arts college. Everything at a liberal arts college is focused on the undergraduate student, and that means the world in terms of the relationships that you have with your faculty, the personal attention you get, the personal attention to your learning, the opportunities that you have. Berkeley is a fabulous institution. It has fabulous graduate programs, but unless you are extremely self-reliant and aggressive, you can get lost in the mix with those 26,000 undergraduates.
And my understanding in terms of the size of Smith, are you saying that the size is such that automatically that brings people to the table, or are you affirmatively going out and trying to reach students?
Both and. It automatically brings students to the table. Students are used to expecting and taking advantage of close relationships with faculty members. Their classes are small. Faculty are part of all of the events that we have on campus. So it's a single social community, a single intellectual community. But if a student hasn't shown up for her class, she'll get a call so that we don't let students drop through the cracks.
And in terms of not letting students drop through the cracks, I think we're going to have to end today. So thank you very much for coming on the show.
It's a pleasure talking to you.
Well, it's a pleasure talking to you. And if you would like additional information about President Carol Crist or Smith College, please visit smith.edu. If you have comments or suggestions about higher education today, please send an email to our viewer mailbox at highereducationtoday@topcolleges.com. Thank you for watching. We will continue to bring you quality discussions about important matters in today's college and university world. Please join me again for another edition of Higher Education Today. I'm Steven Roy Goodman, and you've been watching Higher Education Today.